So Faisal, you may start.
Okay, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. I'd like to welcome all of you again to On the Rasool's Path. Thank you so much for joining us, Imam Azzat. And, we've been really thrilled to have all of the Qalam graduates, Qalam faculty kind of help us navigate these last couple of weeks. And, it's really been enlightening to have, all of this ilm, alhamdulillah, at this time. When the season begins to change and there's an opportunity here for all of us to increase our knowledge. To whoever is participating, I just would recommend that you invite your friends, your other colleagues, just share the link because honestly, we've really enjoyed the last couple of sessions. And I'm sure that today is going to be just as wonderful. And today we have Imam Karim Azzat, who is a Qalam Alimiya graduate from the class of 2022. And he joins us now from Staten Island in New York. We know that well. We've used that ferry many a time, Imam. So I hope that all is well over there with you, in the new position, new job. You're not far from us. So maybe, inshallah, sometime you can come up to Boston and, continue this in person like we had last week.
Inshallah, it'll be my honor.
Yeah, so once again, we are so happy to have you. And the floor is yours.
Barakallahu feekum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu, everyone. Thank you again for having, inshallah, we'll get started. So right from where where the class left off from the last week's session. So now so tonight's session is going to be about the miraculous night journey of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, the miraculous night journey of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But before we cover the actual journey for tonight, the story of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj and the amazing journey that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam took, we first have to really appreciate it. We have to understand the circumstances around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, according to majority of the historians and the scholars, they say that this journey occurred after the situation of a Ta'if, in which that you guys covered last week, where the Prophet ﷺ, by his own admittance, was one of the most difficult days of his life, one of the most difficult days during his mission. Up until now, you've been, studying the Meccan seerah, the Meccan time period in which the Prophet ﷺ is going through a lot of very difficult moments. However, none of those, those difficulties are building up one after another to the point where you hit the 10th year in prophethood, the 10th year after he became a messenger, when the Prophet ﷺ is now at the age of 50. This year, according to many historians, is known as Amul Huzn, which is the year of sadness and sorrow. And this kind of was sparked right by that situation of after Ta'if, where the Prophet ﷺ was looking for help outside of Mecca, and he was rejected and physically hurt and emotionally hurt by the people of Ta'if and how they were rejecting him as well. So, kind of putting ourselves in the shoes and the footsteps of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that he was, very emotionally disturbed and upset and hurt, physically hurt. It seemed like there was just every, opportunity that he was seeking was just the wall, a brick wall. He was hitting a brick wall. And on top of that, to kind of add fuel to the fire, this is also the same year that the Prophet ﷺ's two biggest supporters, who have been discussed, thoroughly up until this point, one of them being his wife, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, who was really the first convert to Islam, the first Muslim after the Prophet ﷺ received revelation. Khadija, who was kind of that pillar of support in the early moments in the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ, this was the year that she passed away. Additionally, not only did that devastate the Prophet ﷺ, at this point, by the way, a lot of times you just bring in the human side to this. The Prophet ﷺ now becomes a single dad. He has children. He has a daughter who is still not married yet. And for the Prophet ﷺ, additional to the communal responsibility, the responsibility of him, spreading the message of Islam to the corners of the world, he has to also worry about the responsibility of raising his family, raising his daughters, as now a single father in the middle of all of these people that are sort of against him and actively trying to hurt him. So that definitely was a devastating moment and an all-time low in sort of the emotional well-being of the Prophet ﷺ when Khadija passed away. Now, even the third most significant incident that happened during this year is also Abu Talib, who was the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, who really kind of was like a father figure to Rasulullah ﷺ. He would pass away also in this year, just within a few months of Khadija and Abu Talib would be passing away within a few months of each other. So within a few months during this year, you have two of the most significant, figures in the life of the Prophet ﷺ passing away, and then you have the situation at Ta'if, right? So this was known as the year of sadness and sorrow. And this was kind of, forgive me, a little bit of maybe review, just so we can really set the stage of where, how to really value the what happens right after the end of that 10th year. And before we get into it, there's a very important rule that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to remind us of. And that is that whenever, we are experiencing difficulties, depression, anxieties, moments of just real, the sadness in our lives, we're struggling, we're really trying, and we feel like we're not making progress, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now reminding us that with every difficulty comes ease. That a lot of times people are tested in various different ways, and they're constantly questioning, why am I being tested this way? Why am I going through this difficult? It's like, when you think it can't get any worse, what happens? It gets a little bit worse, right? And it just keeps on, it seems like a downward spiral. And all of these questions come to mind. When this happens, and this is a reflection for, in our own lives, when this happens, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us that with every difficulty, no difficult circumstance goes unalleviated. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings with every difficulty, He brings a level of ease, and He brings comfort, and nothing goes lost or forgotten by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is literally showing us this through the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like we said, is kind of like an emotional low, right? In terms of his morale and his, he was struggling. He still got up every day trying to do his job, trying to, keep going. But, it almost like a human element kicks in where like it's really getting really difficult and really hard in this moment. And so after these most difficult moments, the Prophet ﷺ, just another day, kind of really trying to grind, trying to, keep that morale up, keep that energy up, keep, pushing, keep striving with every day, waking up, trying the best he could. And then, one night the Prophet ﷺ, he just goes to sleep, and he's, trying to relax. And in those moments of drowsiness, as he's about to fall asleep, one of the most amazing moments in the history of Islam occurs in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And, the narrations mention it. And there's a lot of details in narration. So inshallah, I'll be covering it in brief. And if there's a Q&A at the end, if anyone wants to has any questions at the end, we'll go over it in more detail. But so the Prophet ﷺ, he goes to sleep, and then all of a sudden, as he is sleeping, he describes it as the roof of his home opens up as he's laying down there, and he sees Angel Jibreel alayhi salam. And Angel Jibreel was a very familiar face to the Prophet ﷺ at this point. He's been interacting with him for about 10 years now already, through the revelation, through the Quran coming down. And so Angel Jibreel, seeing him, was kind of wasn't anything abnormal for the Prophet ﷺ at this time, but the way that he was seeing him, because the Prophet ﷺ would only see Angel Jibreel in his original form only 2 times in his life. The first time would be when the Prophet ﷺ first revealed revelation in Ghar Hira, in the cave of Hira, where the Prophet ﷺ first received revelation. The only other time the Prophet ﷺ would see Angel Jibreel in his original form was during this moment, during Al-Isra wal Mi'raj. So this catches the Prophet ﷺ off guard. He feels like there's something different here. And Angel Jibreel comes with another angel, and they take the Prophet ﷺ, they take him all the way to the Kaaba. They take him from his home to the Kaaba, and over there at the Kaaba, this is when the Prophet, they open up the chest, Shaqq al-Sadr, a very famous incident in the life of Rasulullah ﷺ, and they open up his chest, and they cleanse and they fill, they cleanse his chest and his heart with the water of Zamzam from the well of Zamzam. And, this miracle sort of is happening while the Prophet ﷺ is there, is conscious, is kind of seeing what's happening to him. And so you could just imagine, like, the Prophet ﷺ just a few moments ago, he was very, just must have been alone and, feeling all of this anxiety and sadness, and, his morale was a little bit maybe down, right? But then all of a sudden now what's happening? The angels are, performing this miracle, this, sort of this amazing miracle while he's witnessing it right there. And the angels are there kind of showing him that support that, hey, we're with you. Hey, look, if Allah has the power to allow us to do this and to support you in this way, think about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do when it comes to your circumstance overall. And so this must have really cheered up the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, and by the way, this would also be the only other time the Prophet ﷺ's chest would be split. So the Prophet ﷺ, his, the incident of Shaq al-Sadr would happen 2 times in his life. The first time, inshallah, it was covered probably in one of the earlier sessions, was when the Prophet ﷺ was a young boy around the age of 3-4 years old, when he was in the care of Halima Sa'diyya radiyallahu ta'ala anha. The second time, where the angels would come and open the chest of the Prophet ﷺ and cleanse it with the water of Zamzam, would be during this moment, Al-Isra wal Mi'raj. And some of the scholars, they give some of the reasons as to why this is happening in this moment, is because obviously this is a miracle. This is, there's no logical explanation for it. And it's almost as if this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preparing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the amazing journey that is about to occur. The Prophet ﷺ must be thinking that, wow, this is amazing. Jibreel, like, take me back home. Like, I can't believe, you just took out my heart. Wow, I saw it happen in front of me. Like, how amazing of a miracle that is, right? Around these 2 angels, not just Jibreel, but there was another angel with him. And so you can imagine how the Prophet ﷺ must have felt so special in that moment. And, it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet ﷺ, like, wait, take it easy. This is just the beginning. There's still going to be a lot more. We're just getting you prepared. This is just, sort of the preparations for this journey that you're about to take. And then Jibreel alayhi salam, once they seal the chest of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam back up, Jibreel alayhi salam shows the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam this very special animal, this animal that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is instructed to ride on. And this animal is the very famous white animal that is known as al-Buraq, which is a animal that is kind of like a riding horse. It's a little bit smaller than a horse, the narrations mentioned, but it's an animal, it's the official sort of transportation for the Prophet. He tells the Prophet, say, all the other prophets that need some form of mode of transportation, they would ride on this buraq. And so he instructs the Prophet ﷺ to ride on the buraq, on this animal. And this animal, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the one step of this animal travels as far as the eye can see. So you can just imagine, this animal almost moving at the speed of light, right? Is how fast it must be moving. And so they kind of take off from there, from Masjid al-Haram. And of course, this incident is mentioned in the Quran. In the, there's Quranic evidence and proof for all of this in the very first verse in Surah Al-Isra, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi laylan min al-Masjid al-Haram ila al-Masjid al-Aqsa. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, glory be to him, how perfect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, that he took his servant, he took the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that miraculous night journey from Masjid al-Haram, from Mecca, from the Kaaba, all the way to Masjid al-Aqsa. Now, what's interesting is on the way to Masjid al-Aqsa, again, kind of, this whole journey is meant, and as we, talk about the details of this journey, I want no one to lose focus of what is the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam all of these miracles and, taking him on this journey. There's a real strong purpose behind it. And that purpose is to remind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam how special he actually is, to remind him how noble this mission of his is, and ultimately to remind him that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has your back, you really don't need anyone or anything in this world. And so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the solutions to everything. So on their way to Masjid al-Aqsa, they make a few pit stops. They stop by a land of date palm trees. And Jibreel alayhi salam, he instructs the Prophet ﷺ kindly to get off the animal, the buraq, and he says, pray a couple of rak'ahs over here, pray over here. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he prays, and then he says, where did we just pray? And then Jibreel alayhi salam, he tells him that you prayed in a very pure place. And this is going to be the place that you will make the hijrah to, a foreshadowing the migration of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is actually one of the ways that the Prophet ﷺ, he knew that he was going to eventually migrate, and which meant that alleviating all of that pain and struggling and difficulties in Mecca would soon come to an end, because there's foreshadowing that Jibreel is telling him, Ilayha al-Muhajir, you're going to go there very soon, don't worry. A little bit more struggle and you're going to get right there. Allah is going to put you in a safe environment. And then after that, the Prophet ﷺ, he gets back on the buraq and they continue on with the next place that they go to. The Jibreel alayhi salam, again, he tells them to get off and pray here. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, where did we just pray? And then Jibreel alayhi salam, he tells the Prophet ﷺ, he says that we just prayed by Mount Sinai, Bituri Sayna, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Nabi Musa alayhi salam. That the other miracle that happened, one of the greatest miracles, where the only human being ever got to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it happened right here. And again, if this was, the miracle that happened to Prophet Musa alayhi salam, imagine what's going to happen with you, Ya Rasulullah. This is kind of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alluding to, right? By bringing him through these different locations. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he goes to a few other places. One of the final places that he visits, Jibreel alayhi salam, again, he tells him to get off and pray here. The Prophet ﷺ says, where did we just pray? And Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, we prayed in Bethlehem, and this is the place where the miraculous birth of Isa alayhi salam occurred. That miraculous birth of Prophet Isa alayhi salam happened right here. And so again, you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking the Prophet on this whole regional world tour of all of these miracles happening. Again, showing the Prophet like, hey, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did all these miracles for all of these other prophets. Don't worry, Allah's got your back, right? And then eventually the Prophet ﷺ riding the buraq, Jibreel is right there next to him. They make it to Masjid al-Aqsa. And when they get to Masjid al-Aqsa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says about Masjid al-Aqsa, التي باركنا حوله, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Masjid al-Aqsa is such a sacred land. And it's a land full of blessings, a very special sacred land. And for us as Muslims, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate all of the Muslims who are in pain and struggling and in difficulty over there. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give the Muslims in Masjid al-Aqsa today the freedom that they need to be able to worship Allah and bring Masjid al-Aqsa to the affairs of the Muslims. Ameen. So Allah is reminding us that Masjid al-Aqsa is a very special place, right? And then when the Prophet ﷺ, he gets off the buraq, he gets off the animal, Jibreel tells him, you're here now in the masjid. The Prophet ﷺ, he gets off the buraq, and then there's sort of this area where the Prophet ﷺ is instructed by Jibreel to tie his buraq, tie his animal, right, his riding animal, to tie it to this, sort of ring, right? And it's very interesting because when the Prophet ﷺ turns away from the animal, who does he see? He sees all of these prophets that have been sent before him, right? Some narrations say over 100,000 prophets. Some narrations say 300,000. We know that there are so many prophets. All of the major prophets that have been mentioned in the Quran, they are all there waiting for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, just think about this for a moment, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a lot of symbolism, by the way, in Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, in this famous night journey, a lot of reflections, a lot of lessons. I'm just trying to, for the sake of time, I'll just try and highlight a few key sort of lessons and reflections throughout the story. But Jibreel alayhi salam, obviously by the command of Allah, Jibreel alayhi salam is telling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to tie his animal. Why would you need, if you actually logically think about this, right? Why would the Prophet ﷺ need to tie this miraculous, magical animal that flies at the speed of light, that is, designated and subjected only for prophets, in a sacred land that Allah says we already blessed this whole land in the presence of all of these prophets? Obviously, people, they lock their cars and they tie their animals, right? Why? So it doesn't get stolen, so it doesn't run away, so nothing bad happens. Why is the Prophet ﷺ asked to do this? And this is a very famous, very amazing lesson. And that lesson is, as in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ tells us, that our job, a lot of times, people think that relying upon Allah is just, you kind of let go of everything yourself, of everything that is in your control, and you say, I just trust Allah. I'll rely on Allah. The Prophet Jibreel alayhi salam is teaching the Prophet and teaching all of us that is not what true tawakkul is. Reliance upon Allah is you adopt the asbab, you adopt the means first, right, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, the means that whatever is within your sort of capacity, and then the rest is upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is sort of like the principle that we as Muslims live our life by, that, we try our best, we put in our best effort and our best, we put our best foot forward, right? We use our intellect, we try our best, but ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then, and at that point, that's when we rely upon Allah. And if you follow that step, if you follow this sort of formula, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises to give us, majority of the time. There will be exceptions, but the majority of the time, the principle, the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that He will give you the outcome that you are looking for. But first, you must, you must first hire anyone. So we kind of, in the middle of all of this, miraculous sort of journey, and the Prophet ﷺ is traveling literally the world in a matter of minutes, right? Traveling so fast, prophets are waiting for him. Prophet ﷺ takes his time, and he makes sure to do what he has to do first, and then, obviously, relies upon Allah. And so it's a very beautiful lesson. Prophet ﷺ, he continues on, and he greets, and he's talking to all of the prophets. And then Jibreel alayhi salam, he tells the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that it is time for them to pray. And so they all start lining up to pray. And now there's this discussion of who is going to be the Imam, right? Who should be the one leading the prophets in prayer? I mean, all of the sort of like the MVPs, right? All of the like Hall of Famers of human beings that have ever existed, that have seen everything there is to see in this whole world, right? The most beloved creation by Allah, they're all gathered in one city at one time. And someone needs to lead them. And so Jibreel alayhi salam, he nudges the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam forward, to say that, as if to say the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam should be the one, the Imam, that he should be leading all of these other amazing prophets. And again, subhanAllah, if you think about, and this is really why this journey is so amazing and miraculous, that just a few minutes ago, literally a few minutes ago, right, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was in his bed, relaxing, another tough day at work, another, just thinking, reflecting over the passing of his wife and his uncle and all the difficult moments, that the physical pain that he was still experiencing from Ta'if and all of these things. And now where is he? Where is the Prophet ﷺ? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated and his status and reminded him who he actually, his value, his worth to this ummah, in this world, and essentially in front of Allah, what is the Prophet ﷺ's value? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing him that he is the one leading, he has the honor leading all of these other prophets in prayer. They are all following the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That must have been like the Prophet ﷺ, that must have boosted his morale, right? Because all after the prayer is over, the prophets, they are all giving the Prophet ﷺ, speaking to him, giving him, just praising him, and they're having sort of a conversation. You can imagine at that moment, the Prophet ﷺ is like, this is amazing. What does Jibreel tell him? Jibreel alayhi salam, he tells the Prophet ﷺ, he says, look, we're not done, there's more. And then the Prophet ﷺ is instructed. So now there's a sort of like ladder that comes down, and the Prophet ﷺ is instructed to climb up and to be elevated and raised. And this is essentially where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises the Prophet ﷺ, the ascension part of the journey, right? So the miraculous night journey has two elements. There's the traveling, there's the night journey traveling, and then there's the ascension, the Mi'raj. So the Mi'raj aspect occurs right now at this moment after the Prophet ﷺ leads everyone in prayer. And by the way, this would be the final prayer that is prayed in Masjid al-Aqsa by any Muslim, obviously in this case, Prophet ﷺ, up until the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, during the Khilafah, during the Caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he would be the very next person that would lead the Salah in Masjid al-Aqsa. He would have, during the conquest of Palestine and Jerusalem, during his Khilafah, he would be the next person to lead Salah, and he would end up leading Salah in the same section where the Prophet ﷺ also led the Salah. So again, shows you the status of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So from this moment on, the Prophet ﷺ is now ascended and instructed to go up to the heavens. Now, when they get to the heavens, he's following obviously the lead of Jibreel alayhi salam. They get to the first level of the heavens, Sama'ud Dunya, right? The sort of the first level, first section of the heavens. And from when they get to that section, Jibreel alayhi salam, he's knocking on the gates. The gates of heavens are locked. And so Jibreel alayhi salam is actually knocking on the gates. And, the Prophet ﷺ is just sitting there, just kind of like a bystander, just watching this amazing, sort of tartib and honor and respect and even organization when it comes in terms of the world of the heavens, with all of the angels and how everything is running up in the heavens. And he sees that Jibreel alayhi salam, who is the greatest angel, the most trusted angel by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Jibreel is seeking permission from some of the other angels who are guarding sort of the gates of Jannah to be able to open up. And so they knock, and the angels, before they even knock, before they open the door for Jibreel alayhi salam, they ask, because they kind of saw or they sensed that there was someone with Jibreel. And so they say, Jibreel, we know who you are, but who's that person that's with you? You know, they kind of didn't recognize him, or they didn't see him clearly. And so Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, this is Muhammad. This is, Muhammad. And so the angels, they say, like it's time for him to be, sent to us now. And in that moment, immediately the angels open up the gates of the heavens. And again, by that comment that the angels, the gatekeepers of the heavens, by that comment that they make, it's as if, again, this is the Prophet ﷺ was just sitting there listening to this. And immediately, you can imagine what goes through his head, that these angels who are the gatekeepers of the heavens, they already were familiar with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The only reason why they didn't open in the first place was they didn't even know it was him. But once Jibreel said it's Muhammad, they knew exactly who Jibreel was talking about. They were like, oh wow, it's time already. We've been waiting for him. We've heard so much about him. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Jibreel, they enter, and then they're praising him. And again, you could just imagine how lifted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam feels in this moment. How honored he must have felt in that moment. And then, he goes in that moment, he goes in the first level of the heavens, and he meets a prophet. And in each one of the levels of the heavens, he meets different prophets. And at the end, inshallah, we'll talk about some of the wisdoms or reasons why he met specific prophets. The first level of the heaven in this scenario, he meets Prophet Adam alayhi salam, the first human being, obviously, ever, the first prophet of Allah. And then him and Adam alayhi salam are having a back and forth, they're having a conversation. And then Adam alayhi salam, he gives the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam some advice. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he kind of leaves and he exits, right? And then eventually the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he goes to the second level of the heavens. When him and Jibreel alayhi salam reach the second level of the heavens, the same sort of organization, the same commands, the same routine is followed. And that is Jibreel alayhi salam, he knocks on the gates. The angels at the second, right, the gatekeepers at the second level of the heavens, they ask Jibreel, they say, who is that with you? And again, Jibreel responds, he says, this is Muhammad. And then the angels, they open up, they say it's time for him already. We knew he was coming. We knew he was going to be the one that opens the gates of the heavens. We would only open for him. We didn't know it was right now. And again, so not just, some angels, all of the angels in the heavens are familiar, are almost waiting for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sort of entrance, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Jibreel, they enter into the second level of the heavens. In the second level, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he meets two prophets in the second level. He meets Prophet Isa alayhi salam and Prophet Yahya alayhi salam. And Isa and Yahya, they're both related, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, again, he sits down with them, they have a conversation, he describes them, he makes some observations about them, and then eventually he leaves them, he says salam to them, and he carries on. Jibreel says, come on, let's go, we have to go, wait, there's more. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Jibreel, they reach the third level, and again, same routine is followed, the knock, they ask who it is. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, every time must have been feeling this sense of honor. And then in the third level of the heavens, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he meets Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. And again, he makes a comment about the beauty that was given to Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. And then he goes back, he leaves, Jibreel says, let's go. They go to the fourth level, same routine is followed. In the fourth level, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he meets Prophet Sayyidina Idris alayhi salam, also mentioned in the Quran, right? Idris alayhi salam, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رَفَعْنَاهُ مَكَانًا عَلِيًّا, that Idris alayhi salam was raised to a very high level, a very high station. And here the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is meeting him in the fourth level of the heavens. In the fifth level, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he meets Harun alayhi salam, the older brother of Musa alayhi salam. In the sixth level, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would meet Musa alayhi salam, and then in the seventh level, right, the seventh level of the heavens, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he meets none other than Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam meets Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, and over there, the whole scene kind of slows down a little bit. Again, he has a conversation with each one of these prophets, and just kind of again really quick going through as to why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Why did he meet all of these specific prophets? You know, again, only Allah knows, obviously, but there are some wisdoms that some of the scholars and that some of our teachers taught us that as to why possibly the Prophet ﷺ met these specific prophets. I mean, there are other amazing prophets, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't meet them in the heavens. He met these specifically. Again, this journey was meant to help the Prophet ﷺ, to give him support at time when he needed it. And so in terms of why he met, for example, Prophet Adam alayhi salam, right, in the first level, so some of the reasons that are given is that Adam alayhi salam, just like how he left Jannah and he was taken out of Jannah and he left Jannah to go to this earth, he kind of, migrated in as one can say. This is foreshadowing against something, getting the Prophet ﷺ ready for something that, again, the Prophet ﷺ will need to leave his situation and go to another situation and start a new life somewhere else. And, in the Prophet ﷺ's case, this is foreshadowing again from leaving Mecca, going on the migration to Medina, which will occur soon. In the second level, the Prophet ﷺ, he meets Isa and Yahya. What is the reason of meeting Isa and Yahya? Again, some of the struggles that the Prophet ﷺ, as soon as he migrates, that he is going to interact with and have to deal with in the city of Medina, which you'll cover in upcoming sessions, is the Jews kind of had Medina on lock. The Jews ran the economy, ran the society in Medina, and the Prophet ﷺ would have to interact with the Jewish tribes and the Jewish people of Medina. And so just like how the Prophet ﷺ would have to learn to interact with the Jews, who else learned to interact with the Jews and get, and sort of learn how to converse with them, interact with them, and essentially sort of get them to follow their ways, was Prophet Isa and Yahya, right? They were sent to Bani Israel. And so again, that is why the Prophet ﷺ meets Prophet Isa and Yahya. Just like they were able to do it, you're going to be able to do it. It's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet ﷺ now. In the third level, the Prophet ﷺ meets Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. What is the significance behind that? Some of the scholars, they say that just like how Yusuf alayhi salam was betrayed by his brothers, and then throughout he goes and he suffers in his life because of that. What happens at the very end of the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam? He so easily sort of forgives all of his brothers and his family who did that horrible thing to him, right? And he so easily forgives them. Again, foreshadowing, telling the Prophet ﷺ that you will be betrayed by some of the people that are your people, your hometown people, your extended family, your tribe, but you will have to learn the lesson of forgiveness. And at some point later on, the Prophet ﷺ repeats the same words of forgiveness that Yusuf said to his brothers. The Prophet ﷺ would say to the people of Mecca. In the fourth level, the Prophet ﷺ, he would meet Prophet Idris alayhi salam. As I mentioned, with Prophet Idris, what is the significance there? And that it is mentioned that Prophet Idris alayhi salam was the first human being. He's one of the earlier prophets. He was one of the first he is the first human being who was given the ability to read and write, to really be able to, given the first human being to learn skills and learn trades, how to build structures, how to sew clothes together, how to do these kinds of things. It would, who was the first person to really develop this level of knowledge? It was Idris alayhi salam. And again, in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that this journey is going to be very long. It's going to be very difficult. But if you want anything to last, if you want to leave a lasting legacy, what must there first be? There must be a prerequisite of knowledge. There must be knowledge that is present. A person must take the time to learn, to understand, and then at that point, the actions and the outcomes become a lot more easier on that person when the person understands why they're doing what they are doing. That ilm is sort of an essential part here. In the fifth level, the Prophet ﷺ meets Harun alayhi salam, and again, the significance behind that is that Harun was loved by his people, right? When he was with Prophet Musa alayhi salam, and they left the oppression of Fir'aun, but then his people turned on him and they kind of hated him, and then eventually they would go back and love him again. And again, this would be happening too in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that your own people that loved you, that knew you as a Sadiq al-Amin, the most trustworthy person in society, what are they going to do? They're going to go from that loving you and really respecting you, kind of hating you and waging war against you and battling you, but eventually, through your mercy and through your kindness, that love will reciprocate and will eventually come back, and they will eventually love you again, as it was the case with Prophet Harun. And then the final level, in the sixth level, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, Prophet ﷺ meets, and again, the Prophet ﷺ himself, he says that no other prophet experienced difficulty like Prophet Musa. The Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith, he says, لَقَدْ أُوذِيَ مُوسَى أَكْثَرُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ فَصَبَرَ. But whatever I'm going through is nothing compared to what Musa alayhi salam went through, and he was patient. So who am I not to be patient? These were the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, by meeting and just being literally seeing Prophet Musa alayhi salam, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is being reminded of that lesson of sabr, of having patience through the difficult moments right, that you go through. And then the final level, it is Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam that he meets. And through this, again, it is a reminder that, you becoming a prophet, your affair, your mission, your da'wah is really a result of what? At the end of the day, it is a result of the work that was started by Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. You are the answer to Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam's dua. This is you are finishing and you are completing the mission that Ibrahim alayhi salam started. And this is why when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he performs actually Hajj for the very first time, he would pass away a few months after that. Very soon after, he would perform Hajj. And again, Hajj is what Ibrahim alayhi salam called people to, right? When there was no one that could really hear his voice physically in that moment, eventually the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, complete the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And when he sees Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he sees him leaning against Baytul Ma'mur, right? Which is kind of like this Baytul Ma'mur. It's kind of like this structure in the heavens. It's kind of described, just to give you an example, it's kind of like the Kaaba. It's actually in line with the Kaaba, where the Kaaba is today in Mecca. If you were to have a straight line going all the way up to the seventh level of the heavens, that would be where Baytul Ma'mur is, in the seventh level of the heavens. And this, sort of Kaaba of the heavens, if you will, is what the angels even use to make tawaf. The Prophet ﷺ says when he saw Ibrahim salam leaning against Baytul Ma'mur, there were 70,000 angels that were making tawaf around that Baytul Ma'mur. And every moment, every second that an angel completes his tawaf, how we go make tawaf around the Kaaba, these angels are making tawaf around Baytul Ma'mur. Right after they do that, after they complete their tawaf, that angel never makes tawaf again. So it's like every moment there is a new group of 70,000 angels making tawaf and praising Allah just around Baytul Ma'mur. You can imagine how many angels there are in the heavens. And so this is what happens when the Prophet ﷺ meets these prophets. And then eventually, Jibreel alayhi salam, he's guiding Rasulullah ﷺ through the seventh level of the heavens. And they eventually reach a point known as Sidratul Muntaha, which is kind of like the edge of the heavens, if you will. This is the final mark of the heavens that no creation of Allah has ever reached beyond. The angels themselves who live and who operate in the heavens, all of their knowledge and all of everything that they have seen no one has ever went beyond Sidratul Muntaha. None of their knowledge exceeds that. And then in that moment, Jibreel alayhi salam signals to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked me to ask you to go beyond Sidratul Muntaha, to go, to get buried in a place where no other creation of his has ever gone before. Not even me. Jibreel alayhi salam says, I wouldn't even be able to go beyond this. I am not allowed to. I was not given instruction. Only you. And the Prophet ﷺ, he goes beyond Sidratul Muntaha, and over there's these barriers of light coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And the Prophet ﷺ, in this very special moment, he falls down in sajda, praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, you could just imagine, like, the Prophet ﷺ, where was he just not too long ago, right? And now look at the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has elevated the status of the Prophet ﷺ. When someone says, why am I going through this difficulty? Why am I going through that? What's the purpose of it? Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us just so he can bring us closer to him. Sometimes he puts us in more difficult moments and difficult, situations just so that he can elevate us to a point that we wouldn't have reached without these difficult moments that we went through. And so again, the Prophet ﷺ went through all of that, and now could he have ever gotten there by himself? Now the Prophet ﷺ finds himself in sajda, the closest a creation amongst the angels, jinn, humans, anyone has ever been to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now in this special moment, it's a very private, intimate moment between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. There's kind of a back and forth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam a few sort of injunctions and things things to use as tools that will help him throughout his life. And there are many things that are stipulated in this moment. And amongst them are the prayer. The prayer becomes obligatory upon the Muslim ummah in this moment. For 50 times a day, that Muslims must now pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 50 times a day. Amongst that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, to give Muslims encouragement, to give the Prophet ﷺ himself encouragement, he says that every good deed that a believer does out of Allah's rahmah and mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will multiply it by 10. You know how we get that idea of one good deed is multiplied by 10? This is where we get it from this special moment. It was given to us as a gift to help us, to encourage us to continue to do good. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just talking about the reward for a lot of things, a lot of tools that are used that He gives the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to help him navigate through this difficult journey of life. Eventually, after that conversation is done between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gets up from his sajda and he goes back down now, and he continues, he leaves that area and he continues to take a tour of the heavens. And some of the things very quickly that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he sees as he's kind of taking, Jibreel alayhi salam is essentially his tour guide. And he's showing him around in all of the heavens. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Jibreel alayhi salam, he takes him first to see the heavens itself, Jannah, right, paradise. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he sees Jannah, he sees a few things. He sees people who are, he sees people that were enjoying some food and some drink. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they seemed like they were really enjoying their time. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "Who are these people?" He asks Jibreel. He says, "Who are these people?" This is almost like, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is looking into who will be in Jannah, right? Some of like into the future of the people of Jannah. And he sees these people that are just really enjoying their time, playing, eating food. So he asks Jibreel, he says, "Who are these people that are eating this beautiful food, really enjoying their time, smiling?" Jibreel alayhi salam, he says that these are people, whenever they would see a gathering of ilm or a gathering of dhikr, they would make time out of their day to sit in that gathering. These are people that would always make time whenever they would hear the name of Allah being remembered somewhere, they would take time to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that gathering. And these are, this is some of the reward that they will receive. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he then sees some other people in Jannah who plant a seed in the ground, and then in that moment, as soon as they plant the seed kind of sprouts up and the tree grows out and there are fruits that come out of it. And then the Prophet ﷺ, again, he asks Jibreel, and they literally just planted a seed, and within seconds they are eating the fruits from that tree from the seed, really essentially, that they just planted. And so Prophet ﷺ is taken back by this, and he asks Jibreel, "What is this?" And then the Prophet, and then Jibreel alayhi salam, he responds to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, these are how quickly these people will get the fruits of their hard work. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, what is their hard work? What did they do to be able to enjoy, this very quick, beautiful reward in Jannah and the hereafter? And Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, these are the people that fought, they fought their own desires to do the good, to do the right things in this world. They strived and struggled for the sake of Allah with their money, with their time, with their efforts. They really, the Prophet ﷺ in another hadith, he says, "Al-mujahid man jahada hawa." But a true warrior on the battlefield is not a person who sort of raises up a sword and defends himself on a battlefield. He says that is a warrior, that is a mujahid. But true mujahid, a true person who struggles and strives for the sake of Allah, is a person who fights his own desires. That the desire of being lazy, of really not having, of not waking up for Fajr, the desire of just wanting to get more sleep, of whatever these desires that we have in our lives today, whatever influences are around us, these people, they struggle and they hold off on these desires for the sake that it's greater, and this is the reward. This is how quickly they will get the fruits of their efforts from this world. And the Prophet ﷺ, then he goes on, and one of the most beautiful things in this narration is the Prophet ﷺ, he also sees in this moment, you can imagine up until this point again how amazing the Prophet ﷺ probably feels, and his morale is lifted, all of this energy. And then essentially there's, however, no matter how amazing the Prophet ﷺ must have felt, there's one thing that is on his mind. And what is that one thing? If anyone has been married, has been had a spouse for many years, someone that they truly deeply love, no matter how much happiness and enjoyment you have, you just always think about that person. That person, you never forget about a loved one who has passed away. And so the Prophet ﷺ must have been thinking about Khadija, and Allah is the one that tested him. Allah is the one that put him through these difficult moments. Allah knows how to make him happy as well. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? He shows the Prophet ﷺ palace of Khadija radiallahu anha, who had just recently passed away. The Prophet ﷺ sees the palace and he describes, the architecture of her palace, and he sees it, and it's like as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that the Prophet ﷺ just wanted to be reminded of her and wanted to make sure that how she's doing, and he sees, her amazing palace. This is again how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how to lift us up after testing us in these in some of the difficulties that we go through. Essentially, the tour goes on, and the Prophet ﷺ, he starts seeing some moments from Jahannam, from the fire of hell. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all from the fire of hell. Ameen. The Prophet ﷺ, he sees some very graphic, very difficult punishments that are happening to the people of the fire of hell. And some of these punishments, again, they're very, very difficult. But again, it's good to know about it now so that we can actually do something about it. Good to know about it now before it's too late. And the reason why a lot of these people are being punished in the fire of hell is because one of the main reasons of the punishment, as the Prophet ﷺ himself describes, is that they were too busy to pray their daily prayers, right? The daily obligatory prayers that they have to make. These were people who did haram things, who stole money, who didn't, who engaged in riba when they weren't supposed to, didn't pay their zakat, etc., etc. Right? They fell short of their obligations towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and towards other people as well. The Prophet ﷺ, he's like, okay, I've seen enough. It's time to now go back. I have to go back and tell my people about this amazing journey. So really quick, the Prophet ﷺ, he tells Jibreel, let's go back. The Prophet ﷺ now starts working on descending back down to the earth. So he had already reached that highest place, that climax, meeting Allah, seeing the tour of Jannah, and now the Prophet ﷺ is on his way down. On his way down, he sees Prophet Ibrahim. Now we're going to go backwards order, right? Prophet Ibrahim in level 7. Assalamu alaikum, Prophet Ibrahim. It was great meeting you. I have work to do now. Now I have all the advice. I met all the prophets. I met all the role models. Allah told me what to do. It's time to get work. Prophet ﷺ goes down to level 6. He sees Musa alayhi salam. Says, Assalamu alaikum, Musa. Musa alayhi salam says, oh, wait, not so fast. Musa alayhi salam says, what happened up there between you and Allah? Musa wanted he wanted the extra, the extra FY, the extra information there, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ, he says, okay, he says, I got to talk to Allah, all of these amazing things happened. He told me about the rewards and this and that. And he also told me to pray 50 times a day. Musa alayhi salam said, oh, wait, what? He said, pray how many times? The Prophet ﷺ said 50. Musa alayhi salam says, no. He says, trust me, your ummah, your nation will not be able to do that. Please go back, do yourself a favor, go back and ask Allah to make it easier. And, a very interesting point here is the Prophet ﷺ himself, if you count, the obligatory prayers, the sunnah prayers, the nawafil, all of these sort of prayers the Prophet ﷺ would do in his normal day throughout the rest, his whole life before, and mainly after the Isra wal Mi'raj, the number of rak'ahs would come very close to 50. It would actually, he'd be praying around 48 rak'ahs or so, if you count all of the times the Prophet ﷺ would pray and all the extra prayers that he would do. So the Prophet ﷺ himself really didn't have an issue. He would kind of maintain that and almost pray very close to 50 times a day anyway. But the Prophet ﷺ knew that what Musa was telling him was the right thing to do, because the Prophet ﷺ was thinking about people that would be living in America 1,400 years later, that have working hours, that have so many distractions around them. They're gonna struggle with praying 50 times a day, which would be like every half hour or so. Prophet ﷺ knew it wasn't just about him; it was about his family, his extended family, his brothers, his sisters that would come later on. And so Prophet ﷺ was thinking about us in that moment, and in that moment of, he must have felt shame, a little bit of shame and embarrassment. Imagine how difficult it would be to go back to Allah, who was literally giving the Prophet ﷺ all of these amazing miracles. And it's like, Allah, all of this was great, but I need you to do a little bit more. And essentially the Prophet ﷺ, out of love for us, he goes back to Allah, he goes back to level 7, sees Ibrahim alayhi salam is like, well, I thought we already just said hi, like, what's going on? Why are you back here? Prophet ﷺ is like, I gotta do something. He goes back beyond Sidratul Muntaha, he goes there and he asks Allah, he says, oh Allah, I ask you to make it easier on my ummah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I have made it easier by 5. Obviously, a very famous narration story that we all know. Prophet ﷺ says, Allah, alhamdulillah, thank you, that it's good. Sorry for asking, I won't be back. Assalamu alaikum, right? He goes down, says salam to Prophet Ibrahim again, back to level 6 with Prophet Musa. Prophet Musa is like, what is it now? Prophet ﷺ says, 45 prayers, all right? Happy, we're good, everyone good to go? Prophet Musa says, no. Says, go back. They won't handle 45. Prophet ﷺ goes back, and at this point, Prophet Ibrahim is like, probably a little bit like, what's going on right now? Like, why am I so confused, not knowing what's going on? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he goes back to Allah, he's like, oh Allah, a little bit easier. Allah brings it lesser by 5, makes it easier by 5. So now it's 40 times. And at this point, you could also almost imagine Prophet ﷺ trying to like avoid maybe Prophet Musa. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but no, Prophet Musa, he sounds like, hey, what is it now? And Prophet ﷺ says, it's 40. Are we good? Prophet Musa alayhi salam says, no, go back. And he keeps on, this journey keeps on going back between Prophet ﷺ and Allah. The Prophet ﷺ keeps going back for us up until it becomes 5. And even after it becomes 5 prayers, after Allah brings it down in increments of 5, all the way until it goes from 10 to 5, Prophet ﷺ comes back down. Prophet Musa says, well, what is it now? Prophet ﷺ says, 5 prayers. Are we good? Are we happy? Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he says, no, go back. He says, your ummah will not even handle that. And in that moment, the Prophet ﷺ, he was like, I don't know if I can go back anymore after 5. What do you expect it to be? That's the least that we can do. And in that moment, the Prophet ﷺ hears a voice from the heavens saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained 5 daily prayers for the believers, and whoever prays them, then that person will get the reward of praying all 50 prayers. And this is how the institution of Salah came into our deen. And then eventually, the Prophet ﷺ, for the final time, alhamdulillah, he would say salam to the Prophet Ibrahim, Musa, and all the other prophets. And then he would eventually go back on and return to his home in Mecca. And this kind of concludes that journey of the Prophet ﷺ. And when he gets back, it's very fascinating because one of the narrations mentioned that his doorknob was still sort of shaking because he had just entered his room when he went to sleep right before the journey took place. And when he gets back, the door was still shaking. Meaning that this whole journey, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he kind of almost like stopped time on earth for the Prophet ﷺ. So this wasn't just a miracle in front of the Prophet. This was a miracle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stopped stopped everything else on earth just for the Prophet ﷺ to go through this amazing moment. And the Prophet ﷺ, he immediately gets up and he starts telling people, his family members, and he rushes over to the Kaaba and he starts telling people about this amazing journey. Obviously, these were people, many of them were not sincere. Obviously, the Muslims believed the Prophet ﷺ. Many of the of Quraysh at the time, they were not sincere. They knew the Prophet ﷺ was telling them the truth, but they were trying to find holes in his argument. They were trying to find reasons not to believe him, and many of them, they would make fun of him and they would mock him, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't care. He was like, I just went on this amazing journey. I'm telling whoever wants to listen. And one of the first people that was sitting there front row was none other than the person who was always with the Prophet ﷺ, the person who would be, the leader of the Muslims after the departure of the Prophet ﷺ. It was Abu Bakr, and this is actually in this moment is where Abu Bakr, he gets his nickname known as Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. The reason why he's called as-Siddiq, the Prophet ﷺ says, Allah has named you as-Siddiq, because Abu Bakr was sitting right there front row, saying the Prophet ﷺ is truthful with every statement that he said. This miraculous journey of Al-Isra wal Mi'raj. And there are many, people start asking for proof and things like that. And there are many miracles that even the people of Mecca, for as much as they didn't like him and they were trying to find any reason to sort of mock the Prophet ﷺ, to make him look bad, they couldn't deny the fact that the miracles of the way of the proofs the Prophet ﷺ gave them that he was there. The proofs where they asked him to describe, what Masjid al-Aqsa looks like. There was other miracles and proofs that happened, and they themselves were like, he's telling the truth. Even though they didn't believe in him, they were, but they knew the Prophet ﷺ was telling the truth, that he really did go on this journey. And this kind of concludes Al-Isra wal Mi'raj. And from this moment on, now the Prophet ﷺ, he has this, rejuvenated sense of self and purpose, and he has all of this energy. Just when his morale was getting a little bit, discouraged, maybe the Prophet ﷺ, now he saw the fruits of all of this hard work that has been done before him from all of the other prophets. He has all the encouragement, all the tools that he needs, and now he's ready to, give da'wah to the ummah, to the Muslims. And now he kind of like, sort of reignites his engine to start giving, to give da'wah. With like this just rejuvenated sort of energy, and he comes with a gift for the believers. And out of this whole journey, again, many lessons. One of the most amazing gifts and blessings that we benefit today from is the blessing of the institution of salah, of praying our daily prayers 5 times every day. Right? A lot of times, we all experience difficult moments in our lives. We all experience, moments of struggling and difficulty. The Prophet ﷺ, he was very clear with us. He says, as-salatu mi'raj al-mu'min. He says that not every human being is going to get to go through this amazing journey whenever they lose a family member, whenever they go through, lose a job, lose their home. They're not going to be able to go through this amazing, miraculous night journey, right? But he did, however, give us an alternative. And he said that the salah, the prayer, is the ascension of a believer, meaning that when a believer, when they're in that moment, they want to experience that amazing feeling, that that smile that you can imagine was on the face of the Prophet ﷺ through this whole journey. If a believer wants to experience something similar, that is what salah has been there for. As the Prophet ﷺ says in another hadith, أَقْرَبُ مَا يَكُونُ الْعَبْدُ لِرَبِّهِ وَهُوَ سَاجِدٌ, that the closest the person will ever be. Kind of imagine again that moment where the Prophet ﷺ was very close to Allah, the closest a human being will ever be to Allah, to experience that divine power, that that impact on a person's heart, is while he is in the state of prostration, the state of sajda. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst those who are consistent and diligent with our prayer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to ease our difficult moments in life, and to always follow up our difficulties with ease, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised, inna ma'al usri yusra, with every difficulty comes ease. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakallah khair again for listening. Inshallah, that was, if anyone has any questions, I don't know if there's time for a Q&A.
Imam Karim, Jazakallah khair, that was a wonderful rendition again in detail for the Isra and Miraj. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. If anybody has questions, they can write it in the chat or they can unmute themselves now and go ahead and ask any questions. And maybe I can start because, sometimes you hear the narration with kind of, not important, but little changes. Like, for example, that the Prophet ﷺ was sleeping in the haram itself, not in a house with the roof open. And he was taken from there and then returned there. What do you make of these kind of little kind of differences, or are they important, not important? Most of the other details are very consistent.
Sure. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a difference. The thing is, when it comes to the specifically Al-Isra wal Mi'raj, there are just dozens upon dozens of narrations. So obviously all of amongst the common, the common denominator amongst all of the narrations are the important things, right? The significant moments. In terms of the specific fine details, was he sleeping in his home? Was he sleeping in a family member's home? Some say that he was sleeping at the Haram, at the Kaaba itself when Jibreel came to him. Some of these details, there's a little bit of difference of opinions, different narrations, and there's actually a very interesting reason for that. The reason is a lot of times you have these sort of conflicting narrations because the idea of narrating these ahadith, people at this time, right, in the early Meccan period, and in the 13 years of Mecca, essentially, people were talking about the Prophet ﷺ and narrating the stories that they learned from him. People couldn't even pray in public. People had to keep their Islam very private. We kind of sometimes forget this. We're very privileged here in America. At that time, you couldn't go out looking like a Muslim. It would be very dangerous for you. And so, let alone talking about. So the Prophet ﷺ, there was this moment where he gathered everyone, he talks about it. But then you have different, companions might have, heard different elements, different parts from different people, kind of in secret gatherings. And so that's why you have a little bit of differences when it comes to the minor details. This is somewhat common with some of the narrations, the minor details when it comes to things that occurred during the Meccan period. A lot of this, by the way, is not as common when it comes to the Medinan period, when they would, after the migration, because it was just, people could practice Islam openly. The Sahaba would narrate hadith very openly, so it was more developed, you could say, by then in terms of the teachings and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina and onwards. In Mecca, it was such a difficult, extreme sort of circumstance that there was a lot of, people didn't get to really, say, hey, did you get the notes from that? I wasn't with the Prophet ﷺ there. What did he say this or what did he say that? It wasn't they couldn't really corroborate every small detail, but these details are minor. The differences are in the minor details. The major details that we mentioned, like the idea of Shaq al-Sadr, like the opening of the chest, meeting obviously the angels, the Buraq, the Ascension, leading the Prophet to prayer. All of these major details are common in all of these narrations. Allah. I'm sorry, I think it's muted.
Sorry, I think the question in the chat, Imam.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me check. So, Mike, what is the significance of the ordering of the prophets in each of the levels of Jannah? So, Allah, very good question. Barakallahu feek. So again, some of the significance as to why these specific prophets I kind of mentioned throughout the talk. In terms of the ordering, like Adam alayhi salam first, and then Isa and Yahya second, etc., third and fourth. All of these, like the tartib of that, I'm not sure actually. I can what I'll actually do is I'll see if there's any like wisdoms. We may not know for sure. There might just be some ideas, some sort of. Just some sort of opinions out there by some of the scholars, but I'm not sure if we have specific reasoning as to why these, even in terms of like why these prophets specifically outside of the order, the reasons that I sort of mentioned, these are just all kind of ijtihadi, like just opinions of some of the scholars and the things that they have observed. Wallahu a'lam, only Allah knows. And I'll look into it though. If I find anything more than that, I'll share it.
Faisal, are you saying something? So it looks like Faisal may have dropped off. So if there are no other questions, so this brings us towards the end of our session, inshallah, and Jazakallah khair, Imam Karim, for your detailed summary of this beautiful incident in Prophet's life, and which is mentioned in the Quran also. Faisal is back, so I'll let Faisal conclude, and that inshallah we will have another session for everybody's information next Wednesday, and we will send emails out with the details of that.
Imam Karim, thank you so much again. Jazakallah khair. And may Allah bless you, increase you in both worlds, inshallah. And I'd again like to encourage all of the participants to please join us again next week, same time, same link, and spread the link as well, because I think we're really benefiting from all of your benefit, your knowledge. So perhaps you can just end us with a dua, Imam Karim, and then we'll close.
جزاك الله خير again. اللهم لك الحمد حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه. اللهم لك الحمد حمد كله يا رب العالمين.
آمين.
اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت. اللهم ما عز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين.
آمين.
اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. Oh Allah, allow us to get closer through studying the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Oh Allah, allow us to take some lessons and to find practical solutions to our problems in our lives through studying this beneficial knowledge. Oh Allah, allow this knowledge to be beneficial, to be on our scales, to work for us in the day of judgment, not against us in the day of judgment. Oh Allah, alleviate all of the pain and suffering of the Muslims around the world. Oh Allah, alleviate the pain and sufferings of the Muslims, specifically in Palestine, in the Holy Land. Oh Allah, ease the suffering of all of the Muslims around the world. Oh Allah, please accept our dua. Oh Allah, accept our dua. Jazakallah khair. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Jazakallah khair. Allah Hafiz.